Can you tell me where the nearest police station is? Hannah Carter's voice cracked as she said it, her eyes darting to the door behind her. Three bikers in Hell's Angels vests turned slowly. The whole gas station went silent. Everyone expected the bikers to laugh her off. Instead, the biggest one gray, beard arms covered in ink, stood up without a word and pulled out the chair across from him. "Sit down first," he said. "Then we'll talk about where you need to go." She didn't move. "Please, if I'm too late, someone innocent is going to disappear forever." If this story moves you, hit subscribe and stay with me all the way to the end and drop a comment telling me what city you are watching from tonight. I love seeing how far these stories travel. The bell over the door of the Cross County Gas and Grocery jangled at 6:47 in the evening, and nobody inside paid much attention to it. Why would they? It was a Tuesday. The regulars were exactly where they always were. Earl Higgins nursing a coffee at the counter, two truckers arguing about weigh stations near the cooler, and the three men in leather vests sitting at the corner table like they did most nights, this time of year, halfway between one ride and the next. Then the door didn't close behind whoever walked in. It just hung open a second too long, and the evening air came in with it dry and hot off the Montana highway. That was the first thing Jack Dawson noticed. Not her face, not even her clothes. Just that the door stayed open a half-second longer than it should have, like the person walking through it wasn't sure whether she was allowed to be there at all. He looked up. A young woman stood just inside the entrance. Blonde hair pulled back in a knot that had mostly come undone. Jeans gray with road dust. One sneaker with the sole flapping loose at the toe. Her arms were wrapped tight around her own ribs, like she was holding herself together by pressure alone. Jack had been riding for 31 years. He'd pulled overdose victims off bathroom floors, calmed down men twice his size who were about to do something they couldn't take back, and sat with more than one grieving mother at more than one funeral. Nobody else showed up to. He knew what fear looked like on a human face. This wasn't ordinary fear. This was the kind that lived in a person's shoulders for weeks. "Y'all need something," the cashier called out to her, not unkindly, just the way you'd greet anybody. The girl didn't answer him. Her eyes were already moving past the register, past the chip aisle, scanning the room the way a person scans a room when they're checking exits. And this was the part that made Earl Higgins actually turn all the way around on his stool. Her eyes landed on the three men in the corner, the three men with Hell's Angels stitched in red across the backs of their vests, and she walked straight toward them. Not around them, not past them to the counter the way any normal frightened stranger might do, aiming for whoever looked the most official, the most soft, the most safe. She walked toward the bikers. "Oh, this ought to be good," muttered one of the truckers under his breath, elbowing his buddy. Somebody at the counter actually pulled out their phone thumb, hovering over the camera, like they expected a scene. Marcus Preacher Kowalski, sitting to Jack's left, set his coffee down slow and quiet. Tiny Delgado across the table didn't move at all, just watched her the way you'd watch weather rolling in. She stopped 2 feet from their table, close enough that Jack could see her hands were shaking, close enough to see the faint yellow-green shadow of a bruise circling her left wrist, half covered by her sleeve, the kind of mark that's a week or two into healing, close enough to see that her eyes kept flicking, not to them, not fully, but past them, toward the window, toward the parking lot, toward the road. "Can you tell me," she said, and her voice came out smaller than she meant it to, "where the nearest police station is?" Nobody at the corner table laughed. Nobody sneered. For 3 full seconds, nobody said anything at all. Then Jack Dawson, 56 years old, 3 tours behind him, a scar over his left eyebrow, he never explained to anybody, pulled out the chair across from himself with the toe of his boot. "Sit down first," he said, "then we'll talk about where you need to go." She didn't sit. Her eyes went wide just for a second, like she hadn't expected him to speak to her, like a person instead of a problem to be handled. I just need directions, that's all. I don't want any trouble." "You're not trouble," Jack said, "but you look like you're running from some." Her mouth opened, closed again. "Sit down," he said again, gentler this time. "Nobody's going to touch you. Not here. Not while we're sitting at this table." Something in the way he said it, flat, certain, no performance in it at all, made her pull the chair back an inch. She still didn't sit. Her hand rested on the back of it like she needed the option to run. "Please," she said, "if I'm too late, someone innocent is going to disappear forever." The whole table went still. Preacher's jaw tightened. Tiny leaned forward an inch, elbows on the table, the way he did right before a situation turned serious. And Jack had heard a lot of desperate things said in gas stations and truck stops over 3 decades of riding. But he had never once heard a 20-year-old girl say the word disappear like she already knew exactly what that word cost. "Sit down," Jack said a third time, and this time it wasn't a request. "You're safe right now, right this second. At this table, you are safe. But I need you to sit down and breathe because you're about 2 seconds from falling over, and then we're going to have a different problem." Her knees seemed to understand before the rest of her did. She sank into the chair like the strings holding her up had finally been cut. "What's your name?" Jack asked. "Hannah?" Her voice barely carried. "Hannah Carter." "I'm Jack. This is Marcus. Everybody calls him Preacher." "That's Tiny." He didn't smile exactly, but something in his face softened just slightly, the way a man's face softens around something fragile. "Now, tell me why a girl walks into a gas station in the middle of nowhere and asks 3 strangers in biker vests for the police instead of asking the man behind the counter." Hannah's eyes flicked toward the register, toward the cashier, who was very obviously pretending not to listen while listening with his whole body. "Because I didn't know if I could trust him," she said quietly. "I don't know if I can trust anybody wearing a uniform anymore either. That's actually part of the problem." Preacher and Tiny exchanged a look across the table. It was the kind of look that passed between men who'd ridden together long enough to have a whole conversation without a single word. "Okay," Jack said slowly. "That's a strange thing to say. Start smaller. When's the last time you ate something?" Hannah blinked like the question had knocked her sideways. "Yesterday morning, I think." Jack didn't ask permission. He just lifted 2 fingers toward the counter, and the cashier who'd been standing there gripping the edge like it was a lifeboat practically ran to grab a menu. "Bring her a burger," Jack said. "Fries. Water first, then a Coke if she wants it." "I can't pay for," Hannah started. "Did I ask you to pay for it?" She stopped. Something about the bluntness of it, the total absence of any expectation behind it, made her eyes fill up fast and sudden. She pressed the back of her hand against them like she was furious at her own tears for showing up uninvited. "Sorry," she whispered. "I'm sorry, I haven't had anybody just do something for me in a long time, without wanting something back." "Nobody at this table wants anything from you," Jack said, "except maybe the truth whenever you're ready to give it. And I don't mean right this second. Eat first." The water came. Hannah's hands shook so badly around the glass that Tiny 6'4", 300-pound tattoos up both forearms of a man who once benched a Harley off a friend's chest in a parking lot accident, reached over without a word and steadied the glass with 2 fingers until she got it to her mouth. "Thanks," she breathed. "Don't mention it," Tiny said, and went back to looking like a mountain that didn't talk much. The burger came. Hannah ate like a person who'd forgotten food was a thing that existed 3 bites in before she seemed to remember to slow down, to chew, to breathe between mouthfuls. Jack let her eat in silence for a full 2 minutes, watching the parking lot out the window the entire time without ever peering to. That was when the black pickup truck rolled slowly past the front of the station. It didn't stop. It didn't even really slow down. But Hannah's fork clattered against her plate, and her whole body went rigid and her eyes locked onto that truck like it was the only thing in the entire world. "Hannah," Jack's voice stayed level, stayed low. "Look at me, not the window. Me." She dragged her eyes off the glass chest heaving. "Was that the truck?" he asked. Her silence answered for her. "Okay." Jack didn't turn around to look himself, not yet, not in a way that would tip off anybody watching from outside that the table had clocked the vehicle. Preacher. Preacher was already moving, sliding out of the booth like it was nothing, like he was just headed to use the bathroom, angling toward the front window at a pace that wouldn't draw a single eye. "It's gone," he said quietly a moment later, sliding back into his seat. Didn't stop, didn't turn around, just rolled on through. Hannah's shoulders sagged, but only a little. "They do that," she whispered. "They drive by slow, just to see if I'm somewhere. They don't always stop. Sometimes that's worse, because you never know if they saw you or not." "Who is they?" Jack asked. Hannah's eyes dropped to the folded piece of paper sitting on the table beside her water glass, a piece of paper she hadn't let go of since she walked in the door, corners soft and gray from being held too long, too tight. I can't, she said. I don't even know you. I don't know if telling you makes it worse. I don't know if telling anybody makes it worse. Fair enough, Jack said, and meant it, no push behind the words, no pressure. You don't owe three strangers your whole story over a gas station burger. But I'll tell you what I do know just from looking at you the last 10 minutes, and you tell me if I'm wrong. Hannah went still. You've got a bruise on that wrist that's a week, maybe 2 weeks old, Jack said quietly. You keep checking every vehicle that passes on that road like your life depends on which one slows down. You picked a seat with your back to the wall the second you sat, which means somebody taught you that lesson the hard way and taught it recent. And you didn't walk in here looking for the police because you trust the police. You walked in here because you're out of better options and you're desperate enough to gamble on three strangers in biker vests being safer than the badge you're supposed to be able to trust. Hannah's breath caught somewhere in her chest. How far did you walk to get here? Jack asked. 15 miles, she said, and her voice broke clean in half on the second word. Maybe more. I lost count somewhere around mile 10. 15 miles, Preacher repeated softly, like the number itself was an accusation against whatever had put her on that road. There's a station up in Miller's Ridge, Hannah said, and her hand tightened around the folded paper until her knuckles went white. I was heading there. I picked it because it's the farthest one from where I've been. I thought if I got far enough away and got to a department that had nothing to do with... She stopped herself, hard, like she'd nearly said a name she wasn't ready to say. Jack didn't push. He let the silence sit there comfortable as an old friend giving her room to fill it or not fill it, whichever she needed. Which station were you planning to trust? He finally asked, nodding toward the paper. Hannah's fingers trembled as she started to unfold it slow, like the paper itself might bite her. And that was the exact moment the bell over the door jangled again. Every single person at that table turned at once. A man walked in wearing a tan uniform shirt, a badge on his chest catching the fluorescent light, a hand resting easy on his belt, the way men do when they've worn a gun so long it's just part of their hip. He wasn't in a hurry. He wasn't looking around like a man on duty scanning a scene. He was looking directly and only at the corner table. Hannah's face went the color of chalk. That's him, she whispered so quiet only Jack could hear it. That's one of them. Under the table, Jack's boot found Tiny's shin, one firm tap. Tiny didn't move a muscle above the table, but his weight shifted just slightly into a posture that could become a wall in under a second if it needed to. The deputy's boots clicked, slow across the linoleum. He stopped a few feet from the table, thumbs hooking into his belt, a smile stretched thin and cold across his face. Evening, gentlemen, he said. His eyes slid to Hannah and stayed there a beat too long. Miss, you doing all right? Heard there might have been somebody walking along the county road out there. Matches your description pretty close. Hannah didn't say a word. Her hand hidden below the table's edge found Jack's sleeve and gripped it like a drowning person grips a rope. Jack leaned back in his chair, slow and easy, the picture of a man with absolutely nowhere else he needed to be. Funny thing, he said. We were just sitting here enjoying our coffee. Nobody walking anywhere that I noticed. You sure you got the right gas station, deputy? The deputy's smile didn't move, but something behind his eyes did. Just doing my job, he said, making sure everybody's safe out here. We appreciate that, Jack said. Real diligent of you. For 3 long seconds, nobody at that table breathed. Then the deputy's radio crackled at his hip. Some dispatch chatter about a fender bender 2 miles east, and he glanced down at it, and something in his shoulders eased like whatever he'd come in here looking for. He'd decided wasn't worth pushing tonight. Not with 3 grown men in Hell's Angels colors sitting between him and it. Y'all have a good evening, he said and turned, and the bell jangled once more as the door swung shut behind him. Nobody at the table moved until his cruiser pulled out of the lot. Hannah exhaled like she'd been holding that breath since she walked 15 miles. Okay, Jack said quietly, and his voice had changed softer but also harder, both at once the voice of a man who had just decided something. Now you're going to tell us everything. Not because we're forcing you, because that man just confirmed every single thing I was starting to suspect. And if we're going to help you, we need to know exactly what we're standing between you and. Hannah's hands were still shaking, but for the first time since she'd walked through that door, they weren't shaking from fear alone. There was something else underneath it now, something that looked almost like relief. You believe me, she whispered. You actually believe me. Sweetheart, Tiny rumbled from across the table. A deputy doesn't walk into a gas station looking that interested in a girl who wandered 15 miles for no reason. Something's rotten, and it ain't you. Hannah looked down at the folded paper in her hands one more time. Then slowly, like she was setting down a weight she'd been carrying alone for far too long, she began to unfold it. His name is Victor Hale, she said. And 3 months ago, I took a summer job on his ranch that I thought was going to pay for my last year of college. Jack's expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes sharpened. I've heard that name, Preacher said slowly. Everybody around here has. Man donates to half the county, shakes hands with the sheriff at the 4th of July parade every year. That's the version everybody sees, Hannah said, and her voice for the first time carried something colder than fear, something like fury finally finding its way to the surface. I saw the other version, the one in the ledgers, and once I saw it, he decided I couldn't be allowed to walk away and just forget about it. She smoothed the paper flat against the table. Numbers, columns, dates, a list of names Jack didn't recognize yet but had a sick feeling he was about to learn. These are people, Hannah said, her finger resting on the first name, who used to own land around here. Older people mostly. People who trusted the wrong lawyer, or signed the wrong paper, or just got scared into giving up something that took them a lifetime to build. And Victor Hale, Jack said slowly, putting it together, is the one taking it. Victor Hale, Hannah said, is the one erasing them, and I have the only copy of proof that isn't sitting inside his office safe. Outside, another set of headlights swept slow across the parking lot windows, and this time they didn't keep driving. They stopped. Hannah's whole body froze mid-breath. Jack, Preacher said, quietly, not moving his head, eyes cutting sideways toward the glass. We got 2 trucks now, parked across the road. Not moving. Jack didn't look in the window. He looked at Hannah instead, at the girl who had walked 15 miles on a torn shoe, past a corrupt deputy, into a gas station full of strangers, because she had run out of anywhere else in the world that felt safe. Hannah, he said low and steady, how many more people know what you know? Her eyes lifted to his, glassy and terrified, and underneath all of it, finally for the first time in 3 months, not entirely alone. None, she whispered. Just me. Which means if something happens to me tonight, Victor Hale gets to keep every single thing he stole, and nobody ever finds out how. The lights outside didn't move. Jack Dawson set his coffee down slow and deliberate and looked at Preacher and looked at Tiny, and something passed between the 3 of them that needed no words at all. The same understanding that had carried them through 30 years of watching each other's backs on lonely roads just like this one. Well then, Jack said quietly, standing at his shadow falling long across the table, I guess tonight nothing happens to you. Outside, the second truck's engine cut off, and somewhere behind the glass, in the dark, someone was waiting to see exactly what 3 men in Hell's Angels colors were about to do. The truck's headlights stayed locked on the window, 2 white eyes cutting through the dark, and nobody at that table so much as blinked. Jack Dawson didn't reach for his phone. He didn't raise his voice. He simply lifted 2 fingers off the table, and that was all it took. Preacher was already sliding out of the booth, moving unhurried toward the door, like a man stepping out for a smoke, and Tiny shifted his weight so that his entire frame now sat between Hannah and the window, blocking any clean line of sight from outside. Don't look at them, Jack said quietly. Eyes on me. Hannah's chin trembled, but she obeyed, dragging her stare off the glass and onto Jack's face like it was the only solid thing left in the world. They found me, she whispered. They actually found me. They found a gas station, Jack corrected her. That's not the same thing as finding you, not yet. Outside, the second truck's headlights clicked off. Then the first. Darkness swallowed the lot again, and for a moment, the only light came from the flickering neon sign above the pumps, buzzing every few seconds, like it couldn't decide whether to stay lit. Preacher pushed through the door and stepped out into that dark without hesitation, hands loose at his sides, walking toward the 2 idling trucks with the calm of a man checking on a neighbor's barking dog. Through the window, Jack watched him lean down at the driver's side of the first truck, saying something nobody inside could hear. What's he doing? Hannah breathed. Jack, what is he doing? He's letting them know somebody's watching, Jack said. That's all. Men like that only get brave when nobody's looking. For 10 seconds, that felt like 10 minutes. Preacher stood there, one hand resting flat on the hood of the truck, saying nothing else that Jack could make out. Then slow and deliberate, both trucks reversed out of their spots, turned and pulled back onto the county road, taillights shrinking into the dark until they disappeared completely. Preacher walked back inside like he'd just checked the weather. Well, Jack asked. 2 men in the first truck. Did not recognize either one. Second truck, I only saw the driver, but he had a face like he'd rather be anywhere else. Preacher slid back into the booth, jaw tight. Told them the lot camera was already recording their plates, and it'd be a real shame if something happened to a young lady while they sat there loitering. They didn't argue, just left. They'll be back, Hannah said, and her voice cracked on the word back. They always come back. That's what they do. They wait until you think you're safe, and then, Hannah. Jack's voice cut through hers, not sharp, but firm enough to anchor her. Look at me. You walked 15 miles tonight. You didn't collapse. You didn't give up. You found the one gas station in 50 miles with 3 Hells Angels sitting in the corner, and something in you knew to walk toward us instead of away. That's not luck. That's instinct. And your instinct's been right about every single thing since you sat down at this table. So trust it a little longer and trust us, because we are not going anywhere tonight. Hannah's eyes welled again, but this time she didn't wipe them away fast. She just let them fall, quiet, exhausted. Something in her shoulders finally starting to loosen for the first time since she'd walked 15 miles on a torn shoe. Okay, she whispered. Okay. Now, Jack said, leaning forward, forearms on the table. Finish what you started. Tell us about Victor Hale. All of it. Don't leave anything out because you think it sounds crazy or because you think we won't believe you. We already believe you. A dirty deputy walked in here 20 minutes ago and confirmed it for free. Hannah wrapped both hands around her water glass like it was the only warm thing left in the world. I grew up here, she started. Well, not here exactly, cross county, about 40 minutes south. My mom raised me alone after my dad passed when I was 11. She cleaned houses for a living, and I always knew college wasn't something we could just pay for outright, so I worked every summer since I was 16. Last spring, my accounting professor mentioned that Victor Hale was looking for a summer bookkeeper for his ranch operation. Said it paid better than anything else around. Said Victor had done it before hired students gave them real experience. I thought I'd hit the jackpot. Everybody around here thinks Victor Hale hung the moon, Preacher muttered. Man's practically the unofficial mayor, donates to the volunteer fire department, sponsors the Little League team. That's exactly what I thought too. Hannah said, something bitter creeping into her voice. The first month it was normal, boring even. I filed invoices, reconciled accounts for the cattle operation, tracked feed costs. Victor was polite, distant but polite. He'd come by the office maybe once a week, ask how things were going, tell me I was doing a fine job. When did that change, Jack asked. About 6 weeks in. Hannah's fingers tightened around the glass. I found a folder mixed in with the ranch's operating expenses. It wasn't labeled right. Somebody had filed it under equipment purchases. But it wasn't equipment. It was property acquisitions. Dozens of them. Small parcels mostly. Land that bordered the ranch land near the old railway easement, a few lots out toward Miller's Ridge. That's not illegal by itself, Jack said carefully. Man buying up land. No, Hannah agreed. That's what I thought too at first. Rich men buy land all the time, but then I noticed the purchase prices. Every single one of them was suspiciously low, like insultingly low. A woman named Ruth Ann Pemberton sold 80 acres that should have gone for $400,000 easy, and the deed showed a sale price of $62,000. $62,000 for 80 acres? Tiny repeated, disbelief thick in his voice. That's what the paperwork said, Hannah continued. So I did what any bookkeeping student with too much curiosity does. I started cross-referencing. County tax assessor records, property tax history, names on deeds versus names in probate filings. And that's when I found the pattern. She paused and Jack could see her building up to something the way a person does right before they say a thing out loud for the first time and have to hear how heavy it sounds once it's actually spoken. Every single seller was elderly, Hannah said. Every one of them, widows mostly, a few elderly couples, people in their 70s and 80s who'd owned their land for 40, 50 years. And every single sale happened within months of some kind of legal trouble showing up in their life. A code violation notice, A tax lien that appeared out of nowhere. A lawsuit from a contractor nobody could verify actually did any work. Jack's jaw tightened. Beside him, Preacher had gone very still, the way he did when a sermon he was building in his head suddenly found its ending. They were manufacturing pressure, Preacher said quietly, scaring old folks into selling cheap. Worse than that, Hannah said. I found records of a man named Deputy Roy Castellan showing up at 3 of these properties delivering notices that didn't match anything in the official county filing system. I checked, called the county clerk's office myself pretending to be doing a research project. She told me there was no record of any code enforcement action against Ruth Ann Pemberton's property. None. The notice was fake, fabricated on official-looking letterhead to scare an 81-year-old widow into thinking she was about to lose everything to fiends she couldn't afford so that when Victor's man showed up 2 weeks later offering to take the problem off her hands, she signed without even calling a lawyer. That deputy that walked in here tonight, Jack said slowly. Castellan. Hannah nodded and her whole body seemed to shrink at the memory. That was him. The table went silent for a moment. Outside, the neon sign buzzed and flickered again, throwing long, uneven shadows across the linoleum floor. How'd he figure out you knew? Jack asked. Hannah's hands started shaking again, and this time it wasn't from cold or exhaustion. It was memory raw and immediate crawling back up through her. I made a mistake, she said. I printed copies. I know how stupid that sounds now, but I didn't trust just saving it digitally. I was scared it'd get deleted or the files would get wiped somehow. So I printed everything and hid the folder in my car. 2 nights later, I was working late in the ranch office, and Victor came in. He never came in that late. Never. And he had this look on his face like he already knew something, and he asked me real casual, real friendly if I'd had a chance to review the equipment purchase records from the spring. He was testing you, Jack said. I lied, Hannah whispered. I said I hadn't gotten to that folder yet, but he just kept looking at me. Like he was waiting to see if I'd flinch. And I think I did. I think something in my face gave it away because the next morning my laptop was gone from the office. Said there'd been a break-in overnight. Nothing else was taken, just my laptop with every file I'd been building. But you had the printed copies, Tiny said. In my car, Hannah confirmed, which is the only reason I still have anything at all. That same day, Victor told me my position was being restructured, and that they wouldn't be needing a bookkeeper through the fall after all. Very polite about it, very sorry for the inconvenience. Offered me 2 weeks severance pay in cash right there out of an envelope he already had ready. He was buying your silence, Jack said. I took the money, Hannah said, and something like shame crossed her face. I know how that looks, but I was scared, and I didn't know yet how deep it went, and 2 weeks pay in cash felt like a way out. I packed my things, drove back to my apartment near campus that night, and I thought that was the end of it. It wasn't, Preacher said. It wasn't a question. 3 days later, somebody broke into my apartment, Hannah said, and her voice dropped to barely more than breath. I wasn't there. I was at a friend's place, thank God, because when I came back, everything was torn apart. Drawers dumped out, mattress cut open. My car, the same car where I'd hidden the folder, the driver's side window was smashed, and the folder was gone from the glove box. So they got it, Jack said, something heavy settling into his chest. They got the folder I put in the glove box, Hannah said, and for the first time since she'd sat down, something like a small, exhausted, bitter smile crossed her face. But I'd already moved the real copies somewhere else 2 days before that. I kept a decoy in the car on purpose, because by then I already suspected somebody might come looking. Jack sat back, slowly studying her, with something that looked almost like respect breaking through the concern on his face. Smart, he said. Not smart enough, Hannah said, and the smile vanished as fast as it came. Because that same night, my roommate called me screaming that 2 men were sitting outside our apartment building in a truck just watching engine running. I didn't go home. I grabbed what I had at my friend's place and I ran. I've been running for 11 days. 11 days, Tiny repeated softly like the number itself was an offense. I couldn't go to the police in my own town, Hannah continued, and now that the dam had broken, the words came faster, tumbling over each other like she'd been holding them back with both hands for far too long. Because Deputy Castellan works out of that precinct, and I don't know how many others in that department are involved with him, I couldn't go to my mom's house because that's the first place they'd look, and I couldn't risk them finding her because of me. I've been sleeping in my car in truck stops one night in a church parking lot because I was too scared to close my eyes anywhere else. And the real copies, Jack asked carefully, where are they now? Hannah's eyes flicked to the folded paper on the table, the same one she'd started to unfold before Deputy Castellan had walked through that door. And then slower, she looked up and met Jack's eyes directly for the first time since she'd sat down. This isn't all of it, she said. This is just a summary I wrote from memory names and figures I memorized before they took the folder. But the actual documents, bank statements, the forged notices, copies of Victor's ledger showing cash payments to Castellan, I mailed those to myself. Preacher blinked. You mailed evidence to yourself. General delivery, Hannah said, to a post office in Miller's Ridge. That's why I was walking there. I figured if I could get to that town, pick up the package and find a police department that had nothing to do with Victor or Castellan, I could finally hand everything over to somebody who couldn't be bought. That's why you picked the station up there, Jack said, understanding clicking into place. It's the closest department outside Victor's reach. I thought it was, Hannah said, and her face fell again. But I don't know that for certain. I don't know how far his reach actually goes. That's the whole problem. I don't know who I can trust, and every hour I don't know that package sits in a post office where anybody with the right kind of pressure could make somebody hand it over early or worse. Jack was quiet for a long moment, turning something over behind his eyes. Then he looked at Preacher and something passed between them. The same silent short hand. 30 years of riding together builds into two men. Preacher, Jack said, call Wendell. Preacher was already reaching for his phone. Wendell Briggs. He's retired now, but he ran the State Financial Crimes Division for 11 years before that. Jack explained to Hannah, watching her face carefully. Man doesn't answer to any local badge. Doesn't owe Victor Hale a damn thing. If what you're telling us checks out even halfway, Wendell's the kind of man who can make this move fast and move it somewhere Victor can't reach. You know a state investigator? Hannah asked, something like disbelief cutting through the exhaustion on her face. I know a lot of people, Jack said simply. Some of them wear vests like mine. Some of them used to carry badges before they got sick of watching men like Victor Hale buy their way around the law. Wendell's the second kind. Preacher had the phone to his ear, pacing a slow circle near the window, watching the dark parking lot as he waited for it to connect. Wendell, it's Marcus. A pause. Yeah, I know what time it is. Listen, I need you to actually wake up for this one. Another pause longer. We've got a 20-year-old girl sitting across from me with evidence on Victor Hale. Land fraud, forged documents, a dirty deputy named Castellan running interference for him. Preacher's eyes flicked to Hannah. Yeah, that Victor Hale. Hannah's hands had gone white-knuckled around her glass again, and Jack reached across the table without thinking twice and placed his own hand over hers, steady grounding. You're doing the right thing, he said quietly. You've been doing the right thing this whole time. It just took you 11 days to find people who could actually help you finish it. On the phone, Preacher's voice had shifted sharper, now all business. She's got a package waiting general delivery at the Miller's Ridge post office. Bank statements, forged notices, a ledger with cash payments to Castellan documented. He listened for a moment. That's what I thought too. Yeah, we'll sit tight. Get here as fast as you can. He ended the call and slid back into the booth. Wendell's 40 minutes out, he told Jack. Says don't move, don't call anybody official yet, and whatever we do, don't let that girl out of our sight. Wasn't planning to, Jack said. Hannah let out a breath that shuddered on the way out, something between relief and disbelief. You're really doing this, she said. You barely know me. I walked in off the street and told you a story that sounds insane, and you're already calling in a state investigator. You didn't tell us a story, Jack said. You told us the truth, and it happened to line up with a dirty deputy walking through that door, not 15 minutes later, checking to see if you were sitting right where you're sitting now. That's not insane. That's exactly what it looks like when somebody with money and a badge in his pocket thinks he can make a problem disappear before anybody notices it existed. Outside, the neon sign flickered again, buzzing, and this time it didn't come back on right away. The gas station dimmed a shade darker just for a moment before the light stuttered back to life. They cut the power, Hannah said immediately, her whole body snapping rigid. That's just a bad bulb, the cashier called from behind the counter, not looking up from restocking cigarettes, oblivious to the tension radiating off the corner table. Been doing that for a week. I keep telling the owner to replace it. Hannah's shoulders sagged, embarrassment flushing across her face. I'm sorry, You've got nothing to apologize for, Jack said firmly. When somebody's been hunting you for 11 days, every flickering light looks like a threat. That's not crazy. That's what surviving looks like. Tiny, who'd been quiet for a while, shifted in his seat. Jack, I don't like sitting here exposed like this. If Castellan already made her once, he's going to circle back, and next time he might not come in alone. Jack nodded slowly, already thinking 3 steps ahead. You're right. We need to move her somewhere with fewer windows and better exits before Wendell gets here. He looked at Hannah. There's a clubhouse about 15 minutes from here. Not fancy, but it's ours, and nobody gets in that door without every single person inside knowing about it first. You'll be safer there than anywhere in this county tonight. Hannah hesitated, some old instinct flaring up. How do I know that's not exactly what somebody would say if they wanted to isolate me? The question hung in the air, blunt and honest, and Jack respected her for it more than he let on. You don't, he admitted. Not for certain. Trust isn't something I can hand you across a table, Hannah. You've had it broken by people who were supposed to have your back, your boss, a badge that was supposed to protect you. I understand if you don't want to get in a car with 3 strangers, even ones who just spent the last 20 minutes trying to help you. Hannah looked at each of them in turn. Jack's steady, patient eyes, Preacher's quiet watchfulness, Tiny's enormous, gentle presence that had steadied her water glass without being asked. Preacher, Jack said, call Wendell back. Tell him to meet us at the clubhouse instead of here. Give him the address. Already ahead of you, Preacher said, phone back to his ear. Hannah's eyes dropped to the table, to the folded paper still sitting there, to the 11 days of running etched into every line on her exhausted face. Okay, she said finally, so quiet it was almost lost under the hum of the gas station's fluorescent lights. Okay, I'll go. I don't have anywhere else left to go anyway. That's not why you should go, Jack said gently. You should go because for the first time in 11 days, you've got people standing between you and Victor Hale who don't answer to his money and don't wear a badge he can buy. That's the difference. Not that you're out of options. That you finally have a real one. They rose from the table together, and Jack noticed the way Hannah's hand instinctively found the strap of the small bag she carried everywhere, clutching it tight against her side as they moved toward the door. The same bag he realized that likely held nothing but a phone she couldn't use and whatever few possessions she'd managed to grab before running. At the door, Tiny went first, scanning the lot with the practiced ease of a man who'd done exactly this kind of scan 100 times before in 100 parking lots that might or might not have held trouble waiting in the dark. Clear, he said. They walked out together. Hannah sandwiched between Jack and Preacher, Tiny bringing up the rear, and the bike stood waiting under the buzzing light chrome, catching what little glow the flickering sign still managed to throw. Hannah stared at them for a moment like she'd forgotten in the chaos of the last hour that this was how they'd arrived, that she was about to climb onto the back of a motorcycle with a man she'd known for less than 30 minutes and trust him with the only life she had left. I've never ridden one of these, she admitted. Hold on tight. Lean when I lean and don't overthink it, Jack said, swinging his leg over the seat. It's the safest 15 minutes you'll have all night. She climbed on behind him, hands hesitant, at first gripping the edges of his vest instead of his waist, until Jack reached back without looking and guided her arms fully around him. You'll fall off like that, he said simply. Hold on like you mean it. She did. The engines roared to life, one after another, shattering the quiet of the empty lot. And as they pulled out onto the dark county road, Hannah looked back over her shoulder at the gas station shrinking behind them, the place where for the first time in 11 days someone had finally believed her. She didn't see the black truck parked half a mile down a side road, lights off engine, idling, watching the 3 motorcycles pass by in the dark. But somebody in that truck saw them, and somebody in that truck was already reaching for a phone. The ride to the clubhouse cut through open country, the kind of dark that swallowed everything past the edge of a headlight beam, stars scattered thick overhead in a way Hannah hadn't noticed in 11 days of watching mirrors instead of sky. For a few minutes, wind roaring past her ears, engine vibrating up through her bones, she let herself feel something close to safe. It didn't last. They were maybe 5 minutes from the clubhouse when Preacher's bike suddenly surged forward, pulling alongside Jack's, and even over the engine noise, Hannah could hear him shouting something urgent. "Truck's been trailing us since the turnoff. No lights keeping distance, but it's matching our speed every time we slow down." Jack's whole body tensed in front of her, and Hannah felt the bike accelerate beneath her, the wind screaming louder in her ears. "Hold on," Jack shouted back over his shoulder. "We're not going straight to the clubhouse. Not with company." "Where are we going?" Hannah shouted back, terror flooding fresh through her veins, 11 days of running, collapsing back onto her chest in an instant. "Trust me," Jack shouted. "Just hold on." The three motorcycles peeled off the main road in near perfect unison, cutting down a narrow side lane. Hannah never would have noticed in the dark gravel spitting up behind their tires. Behind them, headlights flared on abruptly, the trailing truck, no longer bothering to hide, accelerating hard to follow. "They're coming!" Hannah screamed. "I know," Jack called back, and there was something in his voice now that Hannah hadn't heard yet all night. Not fear, but focus, sharp and total, the voice of a man who had done this kind of thing before and knew exactly what came next. Tiny's bike dropped back, falling in directly behind them, deliberately positioning his massive frame and machine as a wall between Hannah and whatever was closing in from behind. "Preacher, call it in," Jack shouted. Preacher already had his phone pressed one-handed against his ear, steering with the other, shouting into it over the wind. "Wendell, change of plans. We got a tail. We're diverting to the old grain elevator road. Get anybody you can moving that direction now." The truck's headlights grew larger in the mirror, closing the gap with an aggression that told Hannah everything she needed to know about how far these men were willing to go. "Jack," she screamed, "they're catching up." "Not for long," Jack said, and something in his voice was almost calm now, almost certain, and he leaned forward over the handlebars, and the bike surged with a burst of speed that pressed Hannah hard against his back, her arms locking tighter around him, her eyes squeezed shut against the wind and the fear and the terrible dizzying uncertainty of whether tonight was going to be the night everything finally ended. Behind them, the truck's engine roared louder, closing, and Tiny's bike swerved slightly to block its angle, buying precious seconds. And somewhere ahead in the dark, Hannah could just barely make out the shape of an old grain elevator, rising black against the star-scattered sky. A landmark, a destination, something Jack clearly knew, and the truck's driver clearly didn't expect them to know. "Almost there," Jack shouted. "Just hold on a little longer." And Hannah, 11 days into running for her life, finally allowed herself to believe for the first time since she'd walked into that gas station that maybe, just maybe, holding on a little longer might actually be enough. The grain elevator rose up out of the dark like a tower waiting for them, and Jack cut his headlight the second he saw it. Preacher and Tiny doing the same, a half beat behind him. 3 engines still roaring, but 3 beams of light gone dark all at once, plunging the narrow lane into a blackness, broken only by starlight, and the truck's headlights still bearing down from behind. "Hold on," Jack shouted, and he leaned hard into a turn Hannah never would have seen coming. Gravel spraying the old loading road, curving sharp behind the base of the elevator, and for 3 full seconds the massive structure stood directly between them and the truck's line of sight. It was enough. Jack killed the throttle, easing the bike into the shadow of the elevator's loading dock. Preacher and Tiny pulling in tight behind him, all 3 engines dropping to an idle, so low they barely made a sound at all. Behind them, out on the main lane, the truck roared past the turnoff without slowing, taillights shrinking fast into the dark, its driver clearly expecting them to have stayed on the straight road. For a moment, nobody breathed. "They lost us," Hannah whispered, disbelief thick in her voice, her arms still locked around Jack's waist, like she hadn't caught up yet with the fact that they'd actually stopped moving. "For now," Jack said quietly, killing his engine completely. "That road dead ends about 2 miles up at an old rail crossing. Whoever's driving that truck is going to realize real quick they made a mistake, and when they do, they're going to come back looking." "Then we need to move," Tiny said, already easing his bike backward out of the shadow. "Not on that road," Preacher said, phone lighting up his face in the dark as a text came through. "Wendell says he's 12 minutes out coming from the north side, and he wants us cutting through the old Talbot fence line instead of going back the way we came." "Talbot's been dead 6 years," Jack said. "That fence line's barely a road anymore." "Which is exactly why nobody's going to expect us to take it," Preacher said. Jack twisted around in his seat just enough to look at Hannah directly, her face pale in the dark, her whole body still trembling from the adrenaline of the chase. "You still with us?" he asked. "I don't have anywhere else to be," Hannah breathed, and there was something almost like dark humor buried in the exhaustion of it, the kind of joke a person makes when they've run out of any other way to hold themselves together. "Good answer," Jack said, and started the engine again low and quiet, and the three bikes eased out from behind the elevator and turned away from the main road, entirely cutting across open ground toward a fence line that hadn't seen a maintained road in the better part of a decade. The ride was rougher this time. No pavement beneath them, just packed dirt and scattered gravel, and the occasional jolt that made Hannah's teeth clack together. But there were no headlights behind them now, no engine roar chasing them through the dark, just the three of them in the stars and the distant black shape of hills rolling toward the horizon. It took almost 20 minutes to reach the clubhouse, longer than it should have, but Jack wasn't taking any more chances with a direct route, doubling back twice just to be sure, until finally the shape of a low building rose up ahead, lights on inside a handful of motorcycles already parked out front, and Hannah felt something in her chest loosen for the first time in 11 days at the sight of it. They rolled to a stop in the gravel lot, and before the engines had even finished idling down the clubhouse, doors swung open and three more men stepped out. And standing among them, unmistakable in a way that made Hannah's breath catch, was a tall, silver-haired man in a plain button-down shirt. No vest, no patches, just the bearing of someone who'd spent a career walking into rooms and taking control of them. "Wendell," Jack said, swinging off the bike and helping Hannah down after him, her legs unsteady beneath her from the ride and the fear of both. "Glad you made good time. When Marcus calls me at 11 at night talking about Victor, Hale, and a dirty deputy, I don't dawdle," Wendell Briggs said, and his eyes moved to Hannah with an intensity that made her want to shrink and stand taller all at once. "You must be the young lady who's been carrying all this by herself." "Hannah," she managed. "Hannah Carter." "Wendell Briggs, retired but not so retired. I've forgotten how to make a phone call that actually gets answered." He extended a hand and Hannah shook it, surprised at how steady her own hand felt, like his presence alone was already lending her some of his calm. "Marcus tells me you've got documentation on land fraud, forged notices, and cash payments to a county deputy." "That's true." "It's true," Hannah said, "or most of it is true based on what I saw with my own eyes. The actual proof, the documents, they're sitting in a post office box in Miller's Ridge. General delivery. I mailed them to myself before I ran." Wendell's expression sharpened and he glanced at Jack. "She still has the claim ticket." Hannah's hand went instinctively to the small bag at her side and she pulled out a slip of paper worn soft at the folds from being checked and rechecked 100 times over 11 anxious days. "Right here," she said. "I never let it out of my sight." "Smart girl," Wendell murmured, taking the ticket carefully and studying it under the porch light. "Miller's Ridge Post Office doesn't open again until 8 in the morning. That's a problem because the longer that package sits there, the more time somebody has to figure out where you sent it." "Nobody knows I mailed it there," Hannah said quickly. "I was careful. I didn't tell anybody, not even my mom, not even my roommate." "You didn't tell anybody on purpose," Wendell said gently. "But desperate men make desperate assumptions, Hannah, and if Victor Hale's people have been tracking your movements for 11 days, they may already have a working theory about where you'd run to and why. We can't assume that ticket is a secret anymore, not after tonight." The words landed heavy, and Hannah felt the fragile calm she'd built over the last hour start to crack again. "So what do we do?" she asked, and her voice wavered on the last word. "We move faster than they expect," Wendell said simply. "I've got a contact at the state field office, 2 hours from here, a man named Agent Diane Farrow, Financial Crimes Division. Somebody Victor Hale has never had a reason to know exists. I already put in a call to her on the drive over. She's willing to meet us at 7:30 tomorrow morning and that post office badge in hand, federal authority to take custody of that package the second it's released before local hands ever get near it." 7:30, Jack repeated. "That's 8.5 hours from now." "I'm aware," Wendell said, "which means we need somewhere safe to sit tight until then, and given what just happened on the road getting here, I don't think anywhere out in the open is going to cut it." "She stays here," Jack said immediately. No hesitation in it at all. "Clubhouse has reinforced doors, no windows on the ground floor facing the road, and there's always at least 4 of us here overnight. Nobody gets through that door without every single person inside knowing 30 seconds before it happens." Wendell studied Jack for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "That'll do. I'll stay too. Given the involvement of a county deputy, I want eyes on this personally until Agent Farrow has that package in federal custody. Hannah looked between the two men, something in her chest twisting with a feeling she almost didn't recognize anymore. After 11 days alone, the feeling of not having to make every single decision by herself. "Thank you," she whispered, and her voice cracked wide open on the words 11 days of exhaustion finally catching up all at once. I don't know how to thank you. Any of you. You didn't have to do any of this." "We didn't have to, Brian," Jack agreed, his voice gentle but certain. "We chose to. There's a difference. And one day I hope you understand exactly how big a difference that is." They moved inside, and the warmth of the clubhouse hit Hannah like something physical. Low lights, worn leather furniture, the smell of coffee brewing somewhere in the back, and for the first time in 11 days, she let herself sink into a couch cushion without immediately scanning for the nearest exit. It didn't last long. Jack Preacher said, standing near the front window, phone pressed to his ear, again his voice tight in a way that made everyone in the room go still. "That was Danny. He's on watch tonight," said. "A car's been parked at the end of the driveway for the last 10 minutes. No lights. Not moving." Hannah's stomach dropped straight through the floor. "They found us," she breathed. "Jack, they found us already. How did they—" "We don't know that it's them," Jack said, but his own voice had gone tight, and he was already moving toward the window, careful to stay back from the glass. "Could be nothing. Could be a couple kids parking somewhere they shouldn't. Or it could be them," Tiny said grimly, standing beside him, now both men peering carefully into the dark toward the faint shape of a vehicle just barely visible at the edge of the property. Wendell moved to the window as well, and something in the set of his shoulders told Hannah this wasn't his first time evaluating a threat like this. "License plate?" he asked. "Too dark to read from here," Preacher said. "Danny's trying to get a better angle without spooking whoever it is." The room held its breath together, and Hannah felt her heart pounding so hard she was certain everyone could hear it. Certain the 11 days of running had finally actually truly caught up to her in the one place she'd let herself believe might be safe. Then Jack's phone buzzed, and he answered it fast. "Danny, talk to me." A pause. Hannah watched his face for any flicker of what was coming, but Jack's expression gave away nothing. "Okay," he said finally. "Okay, good. Stay on it anyway, just in case." He ended the call and turned back to the room, and something in his shoulders had eased just slightly. "It's a couple." Danny got close enough to see them in the dome light when the passenger door opened. "Just two teenagers who picked the wrong spot to park for some privacy. Nothing to do with us." The relief that swept through the room was almost as intense as the fear had been, and Hannah felt her knees actually go weak with it sinking back down onto the couch, both hands pressed over her face. "I'm sorry," she said muffled, behind her palms. "I'm so sorry. I keep thinking every little thing is—" "Don't apologize," Wendell said firmly, crossing the room to sit in the chair across from her. "Hannah, listen to me. What you're experiencing right now, the way your body reacts to every shadow and every parked car, that's not weakness. That's not you being paranoid. That's what happens to a person's nervous system after 11 days of genuinely being hunted. It's going to take time before that eases, even after this is all resolved. That's normal, and it's nothing to apologize for." Hannah lowered her hand slowly, looking at him with something like gratitude mixed with disbelief. "You sound like you've seen this before." "I spent 11 years watching witnesses go through exactly what you're going through," Wendell said. "Different circumstances, different criminals, but the same fear every time. You're not broken, Hannah. You're surviving. There's a difference." Jack settled into the chair beside Wendell's, watching Hannah with an expression that had softened considerably from the sharp, alert focus he'd carried since the gas station. "Get some rest if you can," he said, "even an hour. You've got a long night and a longer morning ahead of you, and running on no sleep isn't going to help anybody, least of all you." "I don't think I can sleep," Hannah admitted. "Every time I close my eyes, I see that truck's headlights." "Then just rest your eyes," Jack said. "Nobody's asking you to sleep deep. Just let your body settle a little. We'll be right here. All night. Nobody gets near you without going through every single one of us first." Hannah looked around the room slowly at Tiny, still stationed near the window, massive and unmoving as a fortress wall. At Preacher, phone still in hand, watching the dark outside with quiet vigilance. At Wendell, steady and certain, a man who'd clearly done this exact kind of waiting 100 times before. At Jack, whose face had carried her through the worst hour of her 11 days without ever once wavering. "Okay," she whispered, And for the first time since she'd walked into that gas station, she let her eyes close, not from exhaustion collapsing over her, but from something closer to trust, fragile and new and entirely unfamiliar after 11 days of trusting no one at all. She didn't fully sleep. Nobody in that room expected her to. But somewhere in the quiet hours that followed, curled into the corner of that worn leather couch, surrounded by the low murmur of men taking turns keeping watch, Hannah Carter's body finally allowed itself to rest, even if her mind never fully let go of the fear. It was almost 3 a.m. when Preacher's phone buzzed again, and this time the sound of it jolted Hannah fully awake, heart hammering before her eyes even opened. "It's Danny again," Preacher said, already answering. Yeah, go ahead." His face changed almost instantly, all the calm draining out of it. "Say that again." Jack was on his feet before Preacher had even finished the sentence. "What?" "Danny says there's smoke," Preacher said, lowering the phone slightly, his voice tight with something new, something urgent. "Out past the old Talbot property. He can see it from the ridge. Says it looks like it's coming from the direction of Miller's Ridge." Hannah's blood went cold. "The post office," she whispered. "Jack, that's near the post office." Wendell was already up, already moving toward the door, his phone pressed to his ear. "Farrow, it's Briggs. I need you to tell me right now if there's any activity near that Miller's Ridge post office tonight, because I've got a report of smoke in that direction, and I do not like the timing of this one bit." The room had gone electric, every ounce of the calm they'd built over the last hour, evaporating in an instant, and Hannah stood on shaking legs, gripping the back of the couch like it was the only thing keeping her upright. "If they burned that post office," she said, her voice rising with panic, "if they destroyed that package, then there's nothing left. There's no proof. It's just my word against his, and nobody's going to believe a 20-year-old former employee over Victor Hale." "Hannah." Jack crossed the room and gripped her shoulders, forcing her to look at him instead of spiraling further into the fear climbing up her throat. "We don't know anything yet. Don't build the worst version of this in your head before we have facts." "But if it's true," Jack said, steady and unshaking even as the room around them buzzed with tension, "then we adapt. You're not the only piece of evidence in this, Hannah. You watched it happen. You lived it. You have a memory full of names and dates and numbers that no fire can burn. Whatever happens with that package, you are still the single most important witness against Victor Hale that exists, and nothing that happens tonight changes that." Wendell lowered his phone, his expression grim but controlled. "Farrow says she's diverting an agent to the scene now. We won't know anything concrete for at least 20 minutes. 20 minutes. Hannah felt each one of them stretch out like an hour, the room full of men who'd spent their whole night protecting her, now standing helpless against a threat burning somewhere out in the dark that none of them could reach in time to stop. "Sit down," Jack said, gently guiding her back toward the couch. "Whatever's happening out there, panicking in here isn't going to change it. We wait, we find out. Then we move." Hannah sat, hands twisting together in her lap, eyes fixed on Wendell's phone like it might ring at any second, with the answer to whether 11 days of running had all been for nothing. The clock on the wall ticked past 3:15, then 3:20. At 3:26, Wendell's phone finally buzzed, and the entire room went silent as he answered, his face unreadable as he listened. "Say that again," he said slowly. "You're certain?" Hannah's fingers dug into her own knees, bracing for the worst. Wendell lowered the phone, and for one terrible second, his expression gave away nothing at all. Then slowly something like relief broke across his face. "It wasn't the post office," he said. "The fire's at an old equipment barn 2 miles east of it on a property registered to a shell company. Farrow's agent says it looks deliberate, accelerant. But whatever they burned, it wasn't the post office, and it wasn't your package." Hannah's whole body sagged with relief so total, it nearly took her off the couch, a sob breaking loose from somewhere deep in her chest. "Then why burn a barn?" Jack asked, his eyes narrowing with the kind of suspicion that came from decades of recognizing when something didn't add up. "Because," Wendell said slowly, working it through even as he spoke it aloud, "if that barn belongs to one of Victor's shell companies, and there's something inside it worth destroying before daylight, then Hannah's not the only threat to him tonight. Somebody somewhere is racing against the same clock we are trying to erase evidence before anyone gets close enough to find it." "Which means he's scared," Preacher said quietly, "genuinely scared, not just of one girl's testimony, of something bigger." Hannah looked up slowly, wiping at her eyes, something shifting behind her exhaustion, Now something that looked almost like the first flicker of hope she'd allowed herself in 11 long days. "There's more than what I found," she said slowly, thinking it through even as the words came out. "There has to be. If he's willing to burn a building at 3 in the morning just to keep something hidden, then whatever's inside that barn, it's bigger than land fraud. It's bigger than internet, than anything I even saw." Wendell's eyes met Jack's across the room, and something unspoken passed between the two men, the same quiet understanding that passes between people who've spent their lives learning to recognize when a case just cracked wide open. "Then I suppose," Wendell said quietly, "we better find out exactly what Victor Hale is so afraid of that he'd risk burning down his own barn in the middle of the night rather than let the sun come up on it." Outside, the sky at the edge of the horizon had not yet begun to lighten, but somewhere out past the ridge, smoke still curled up into the dark, carrying with it the first real proof that Hannah Carter's 11 days of running had uncovered something far larger than any of them had understood when she first walked through that gas station door. Nobody in that room slept again after the call about the barn. Wendell paced a slow track between the window and the table phone pressed to his ear off and on as updates trickled in from Agent Farrow's people at the scene, and Jack sat close enough to Hannah that she could feel the steadiness radiating off him, even when neither of them spoke. At 4:40, Wendell finally lowered the phone and looked at the room with an expression that told everyone something had changed. "Farrow's people cleared the barn scene enough to get inside," he said. "Fire didn't take the whole structure. Whoever set it panicked or got interrupted because it only caught in one corner before it burned itself out. There's a safe in there, steel floor bolted, scorched, but intact." "Can they open it?" Jack asked. "Not without a warrant tied to something more concrete than a fire at 3 in the morning, Wendell said, "which is exactly why I need that post office package in Farrow's hands the second it opens. Right now, all we've got is smoke and suspicion. We need paper. We need names. We need the thing that turns a judge's pen into a search warrant." Hannah sat forward, some of the fog of exhaustion burning off her face replaced by something sharper. "The package has bank statements. It has the ledger showing cash payments to Castellan. If that's enough to get a warrant for the ranch office, and the ranch office connects to the same shell company that owns the barn, then Farrell pulls the safe open with a federal judge's blessing instead of breaking the law to do it," Wendell finished. "Exactly, which means everything now comes down to 7:30 this morning and making sure nothing happens to you or that claim ticket between now and then." The words hung heavy in the room, and Hannah felt the weight of it settle back onto her shoulders. Not the same directionless fear she'd carried for 11 days, but something almost worse. Now a fear with a deadline attached to it, a fear that knew exactly what it was waiting for. "What time is it now?" she asked. 4:45, Preacher said from his post at the window. 2.5 hours. 2.5 hours had never felt so impossibly long. Jack must have seen something shift in her face because he leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and spoke low enough that it felt like it was just the two of them in the room, even with 5 other people scattered around it. "You made it 11 days, he said. "You made it 15 miles on a busted shoe. You sat across from a dirty deputy and didn't flinch when it counted. 2.5 hours is nothing compared to what you've already survived, Hannah. You just have to sit still and let us do the rest." "That's the part I'm bad at," Hannah admitted, a broken half-laugh escaping her. "Sitting still. 11 days of running teaches you that stillness is dangerous." "Not tonight," Jack said. "Ma, tonight stillness is the safest thing you can do." The sky outside had not yet started to lighten when Danny's voice crackled through Preacher's phone again, sharper this time, more urgent, and every head in the room turned at once. "Say it slower," Preacher said, and something in his tone made Hannah's stomach drop straight through the floor before she even understood what was happening. "Danny, slower." "What is it?" Jack demanded. Preacher lowered the phone, his face pale in the dim light. "There's a car coming up the main drive. Headlights on this time. Moving slow." "How many?" Tiny asked, already moving toward the door. "Just one vehicle," Preacher said. "But Danny says it's got county markings." Hannah's breath caught somewhere in her throat. 11 days of instinct, screaming at her all at once, and she was on her feet before she even realized she'd moved. "It's Castellan. It has to be Castellan." "Sit down," Wendell said, his voice suddenly cutting through the room with an authority that stilled everyone in head. "Nobody panics. Nobody does anything that gives away we're scared. Jack is your clubhouse, legally on your property, doors locked. Nothing illegal in plain sight. Nothing but coffee and a pool table, Jack said grimly. Then a deputy showing up here in the middle of the night has to have a reason. And if it's Castellan acting alone outside his jurisdiction at 5 in the morning, he is the one operating without cover right now, not us. Wendell's eyes swept the room. Everybody stays calm. Hannah stays in the back room, out of sight, door closed. Jack, you and I handle whoever's at that door. I'm not hiding, Hannah said, and her voice, though it shook, carried something new in it, a thread of the same fire that had gotten her 15 miles down a county road on a torn shoe. I've been hiding for 11 days. I'm done. Hannah, Jack's voice was firm, but not unkind. This isn't about hiding. This is about not handing Castellan a reason to claim you were ever here at all, in case this goes somewhere none of us want it to go. Let us handle the door. You've done enough tonight. Hannah's jaw tightened at 11 days of exhaustion and fear and fury, warring behind her eyes. But finally she nodded and Tiny guided her gently toward the back room, closing the door most of the way, but leaving a thin gap just enough for her to hear everything happening on the other side. Headlights swept across the front windows, engine noise growing louder, then cutting off entirely. A car door opened, boots on gravel. Jack and Wendell stood together near the front door, and Preacher hovered just off to the side, close enough to move fast if he needed to, phone still gripped tight in one hand. A fist knocked hard against the door, 3 sharp raps. Jack opened it himself, filling the frame with his own body, blocking any clear line of sight into the room behind him. Deputy Castellan, Jack said, and his voice was pleasant, almost lazy. The voice of a man completely unbothered by a badge showing up at his door at 5 in the morning. Bit early for a social call. Through the gap in the back room door, Hannah pressed her hand over her mouth, listening to the sound of that voice for the second time in one night, and every muscle in her body went rigid with the memory of it. Jack, Castellan's voice was flat, all pretense of friendliness gone now. I know you've got a girl in there, Hannah Carter. I need you to hand her over. Don't know any Hannah Carter, Jack said easily. Cut the act. She was seen at the Cross County station with you and your boys a few hours back. I've got a witness that puts her leaving with you on the back of a motorcycle. A lot of girls ride on the back of motorcycles around here, Jack said. Doesn't make them fugitives. Unless you've got a warrant, deputy, I'm not in the habit of handing over guests based on a rumor. This isn't a joke, Dawson. Castellan's voice hardened further, and Hannah could hear even through the door the strain underneath it, the sound of a man whose careful plan had come apart faster than he'd anticipated. That girl stole property from Victor Hale. Sensitive business documents. He wants them returned, and he's willing to be generous about it if this gets resolved quietly tonight before it becomes something bigger than it needs to be. Funny, Wendell said, stepping into view beside Jack for the first time, and Hannah heard something shift immediately in Castellan's silence, a beat of hesitation that hadn't been there before. I don't recall theft charges requiring a personal house call from a county deputy at 5 in the morning instead of, say, a warrant. There was a long pause. Who are you? Castellan finally said, and his voice had lost some of its certainty. Wendell Briggs, retired State Financial Crimes Division, 11 years. Wendell's tone stayed perfectly level, almost bore the tone of a man who had said his own name to intimidate far more dangerous people than a small-town deputy standing on a porch at dawn. I'm curious, Deputy Castellan, whether Victor Hale's generous offer tonight includes an explanation for the $11,000 cash deposit that hit your personal checking account 6 weeks ago. Because if it doesn't, I'd start thinking real hard about which side of this conversation you actually want to be standing on when the sun comes up. The silence that followed stretched long enough that Hannah, pressed against the gap in the door, found herself holding her breath along with everyone else in that room. I don't know what you're talking about, Castellan finally said, but the words came out thinner than before, less certain, cracking at the edges. I think you do, Wendell said calmly, and I think in about 2.5 hours a federal agent is going to have documentation that connects that deposit directly to a ledger kept by the very businessman you're standing here defending. So the question isn't whether Hannah Carter did anything wrong tonight, Deputy. The question is how much worse you want to make your own situation by standing on this porch making threats on his behalf. For a long moment, nobody said anything at all. Then through the gap in the door, Hannah heard Castellan's boots shift on the gravel, a slow, uncertain retreat. This isn't over, he said, but the bravado had gone out of it, replaced by something closer to panic, barely held together. Victor's not a man who gives up easy. You're all making a mistake. Maybe, Jack said, but it's our mistake to make, and you're welcome to get back in your car and go tell him that. The car door slammed. The engine roared to life. Gravel sprayed as the vehicle reversed hard and peeled back down the drive, taillights shrinking into the dark until the sound of the engine faded entirely. The clubhouse went silent, except for the sound of everyone finally exhaling at once. Hannah pushed the backroom door open and stumbled out, legs unsteady, and Jack crossed the room to catch her before she could sink to the floor. He's gone, she breathed. He's actually gone. For now, Jack said, echoing the same words he'd used back at the elevator, and Hannah realized with a start that he'd been right every single time he'd said them tonight. Nothing was ever fully over, not yet, not until that package was in federal hands and Victor Hale was somewhere he could no longer reach anyone at all. That deposit, Hannah said, looking at Wendell with something like awe cutting through her exhaustion. Is that real? Do you actually have proof of that? Wendell's mouth curved into the faintest, driest smile. Not a shred of it. I made that number up on the spot. Jack let out a short laugh, low and surprised, and even Preacher cracked a grin from his post by the window. You bluffed a county deputy off a doorstep at 5 a.m. with a number you invented. Hannah asked, disbelief and something like admiration warring across her face. 11 years chasing financial crimes teaches you men like Castellan are already guilty of something, Wendell said. You just have to say a number specific enough that their imagination fills in the rest. He didn't deny it because it was true. He hesitated because he genuinely doesn't know which deposit I'm talking about, and that means there's more than one, and he's terrified I already know all of them. The room settled slightly after that, adrenaline draining out in fits and starts, but nobody fully relaxed, everyone painfully aware of the clock still ticking towards 7:30 and everything that still hung in the balance. The next hour crept by in a strange suspended quiet. Hannah dozed for stretches against the couch cushions, jolting awake every time a truck passed on the distant highway, and each time Jack was there, steady, unbothered, reminding her without needing to say much at all that the room was still secure, that nothing had changed, that she was still, despite everything, safe. At 6:50, Wendell's phone rang, and this time it was Agent Farrow herself. Farrow, Wendell answered, and everyone in the room went still, watching his face for any sign of what was coming. Yes, we're on our way now. He ended the call and turned to the room. She's already at the post office waiting outside for it to open. Says local PD showed up 20 minutes ago, unrelated call, apparently some kind of noise complaint, but she doesn't like the coincidence and wants us there before the doors open at 8, not after. Local PD, Hannah repeated, and the fear crept back into her voice immediately. That's not a coincidence. Victor's trying to get there first. Which is exactly why we're leaving now, Jack said, already on his feet. Everybody up. We ride together, tight formation, no stragglers. They moved fast, the calm of the last hour shattering into urgent practice motion, and within minutes they were back outside in the pale gray light of early dawn, engines roaring to life one after another, Wendell's sedan pulling in behind them as they rolled out of the clubhouse lot and onto the road toward Miller's Ridge. The drive felt shorter than it should have, and longer than Hannah could bear. Both at once, her arms locked around Jack's waist, her eyes fixed on the horizon ahead, where the sky had begun to lighten into the soft gray gold of an approaching sunrise, a sunrise she hadn't been entirely sure 11 days ago that she'd live to see. They crested the final rise into Miller's Ridge just before 7:15, and Hannah's heart lurched at the sight of 2 additional vehicles already parked outside the small brick post office building, a marked patrol car, and beside it an unfamiliar dark sedan she didn't recognize. That's Farrow's car, Wendell called out as they rolled to a stop, nodding toward the sedan. The patrol unit, I don't know. A woman in a sharp gray blazer stepped out from the sedan, the moment they parked, badge already visible on her belt, her eyes scanning the group with quick, assessing precision before landing on Hannah. Miss Carter, she said. Nah, Agent Diane Farrow, I understand you're the reason I'm standing outside a post office at 7 in the morning instead of home drinking coffee. I'm sorry, Hannah started, but Farrow waved it off with a small, tired smile. Don't be. This is the most interesting Tuesday I've had in months. Her eyes flicked toward the patrol car parked nearby, and her expression sharpened. That officer showed up 20 minutes ago on a supposed noise complaint about a business that's been closed and silent since 6 last night. I don't like it. I've asked him to stay in his vehicle while we wait for the doors to open." As if summoned by the words, the patrol car's door opened and a uniformed officer stepped out, hand resting easy on his belt, in a gesture that made Hannah's chest tighten with instant visceral recognition. It wasn't Castellan, but something about the posture, the ease, the too casual way he approached the group made every instinct in her body scream the same warning anyway. "Morning, folks," the officer said, his eyes moving across the group before settling deliberately on Hannah. "Heard there might be some confusion here about a mail package. Local department's happy to take custody of anything questionable. Hold it secure until ownership gets sorted out properly." "That won't be necessary, Officer," Farrow said, stepping forward smoothly, badge already out. "Federal jurisdiction on this one? I appreciate the offer, but I'll be taking custody of any relevant items myself." The officer's easy smile flickered just slightly. "No offense, ma'am, but this is my jurisdiction. Seems like the proper thing is for local law enforcement to at least be involved in the handoff." "None taken," Farrow said, her tone pleasant but immovable as stone. "And you're welcome to observe. But custody stays with me the moment that door opens. If you've got a problem with that, you're welcome to call your supervisor and have them take it up with mine." The officer's jaw tightened, and for a moment nobody moved, the tension stretching thin and taut across the small parking lot as the sky continued lightening overhead, the first true rays of sunrise breaking gold across the horizon. Then from inside the building a light flicked on, and the shape of an elderly postal clerk appeared behind the glass door, keys jingling as she moved to unlock it. 8 o'clock, the clerk called out cheerfully through the glass, entirely oblivious to the standoff playing out in her parking lot. "Right on time, folks." The door swung open, and in that single suspended second, with Farrow stepping forward with the officer's hand tightening almost imperceptibly at his belt, with Hannah's claim ticket trembling in her outstretched hand, and 11 days of running finally narrowing down to this one small doorway, nobody in that parking lot could say for certain whose custody that package was actually about to land in. Farrow's hand closed around the door before the officer could take a single step toward it. "Miss Carter," she said, not taking her eyes off the patrolman, "hand me the ticket." Hannah's fingers had gone numb around the worn slip of paper, but she pushed it forward anyway, and Farrow took it without breaking her stare from the officer still standing rigid by his cruiser. "Deputy," Farrow said, voice even, "you're welcome to walk inside and watch. You are not welcome to touch, handle, or take custody of anything that comes across that counter. If that's a problem for you, I'd encourage you to make the phone call I mentioned a minute ago." The officer's jaw worked for a second, his eyes flicking to Jack, to Wendell, to the small crowd of Hell's Angels vests gathered at his back like a wall. Nobody in this parking lot was foolish enough to test. Then slowly he stepped back, hands lifting slightly at his sides. "Just doing my job," he muttered. "Then do it from right there," Farrow said, and walked past him into the post office, Hannah half a step behind her, Wendell and Jack close on either side. The clerk behind the counter blinked at the sudden crowd filing in through her door at 8 in the morning, but Farrow's badge settled whatever questions were forming behind the woman's glasses. "General delivery," Farrow said. "Package for Hannah Carter." The clerk disappeared into the back, and the seconds that followed stretched longer than any of the 11 days that had led to this moment. Hannah's whole body trembled, not from cold, not from fear exactly anymore, but from something rawer, the terrible possibility that after everything, the one thing she'd protected with her life might already be gone, burned, stolen, replaced with nothing. The clerk reappeared holding a padded manila envelope, slightly worn at the corners, and set it on the counter. "Sign here," she said, sliding a clipboard forward. Hannah's hand shook so badly the pen skidded across the page the first time, and she had to start her signature over. Farrow took the envelope the instant it was released, turning it over once in her hands, checking the seal. "Untouched," she said quietly. "Nobody got here before us." Hannah made a sound that was half a laugh and half a sob, and Jack's hand came to rest on her shoulder, steady, grounding exactly the way it had at that gas station at the table 11 hours and a lifetime ago. "You did it," he said. "You actually did it." "We did it," Hannah corrected, wiping at her eyes with the back of her wrist. "I couldn't have gotten this far alone, not even close." Outside through the glass storefront, the officer was still standing by his cruiser, phone pressed to his ear, now his posture stiff with something that looked a lot like panic. "Dressed up as procedure," Pharaoh noticed it too. Wendell, get her out the back if there's one. I don't like how interested our friend out there suddenly looks in making a call. There was a back door propped for deliveries, and within a minute, the group had slipped out through it into the alley behind the post office, Pharaoh clutching the envelope against her chest, like it was the only thing standing between Hannah and 11 more days of running. What now? Hannah asked, breathless, glancing back over her shoulder as they moved. Now I get this into evidence custody within the hour, Pharaoh said. And once I've got these bank statements and that ledger cross-referenced against Castellan's financials, I'll have enough for a judge to sign a warrant for that safe in the barn, the ranch office, and Victor Hale's personal accounts all in the same afternoon if I move fast enough. And if he runs, Jack asked, man, with his money, he could be across a border before lunch. That's why we don't waste time, Pharaoh said, already moving toward her sedan. Wendell, ride with me. I want your eyes on this while it's fresh. Jack, she hesitated, glancing back at Hannah. Keep her somewhere safe, somewhere Victor's people can't reach, at least until I've got enough for an arrest warrant with his name directly on it. Already got a place, Jack said. Hannah watched Pharaoh's sedan pull away with Wendell in the passenger seat, watched it disappear around the corner, carrying 11 days of fear inside a single manila envelope, and felt something inside her chest crack open. Not from grief this time, but from the sheer, disorienting relief of finally not carrying that weight completely alone. Come on, Jack said, gently guiding her back toward the bikes. Let's get you somewhere you can actually rest. The next several hours passed in a strange, suspended blur. Back at the clubhouse, Hannah slept. Really slept for the first time in 11 days, curled on the same worn couch where she'd only managed fitful dozing hours before, and nobody woke her. Nobody rushed her, the entire clubhouse settling into a hush around her exhausted body, like a held breath finally allowed to release. She woke a little after 2 in the afternoon to the low murmur of voices in the next room, and for one terrible disoriented second, she forgot where she was, forgot that she was safe, her heart lurching into the same old panic, before her eyes adjusted and she recognized Jack's voice, steady and familiar, drifting through the doorway. She pushed herself upright, and Preacher glanced over, offering a small nod. She's up. Jack appeared in the doorway a moment later, and something in his face made Hannah's heart stop entirely. Not fear this time, but something else, something that looked almost like the beginning of good news. He wasn't quite ready to say out loud yet. What happened? She asked immediately. Tell me, please. Pharaoh got her warrant, Jack said. Judge signed off 2 hours ago. State police and 2 federal agents hit the ranch, the office, and that barn all at the same time about 40 minutes ago. Hannah's hands flew to her mouth. And Jack said, and for the first time since Hannah had met him, something that looked almost like a real smile broke across his weathered face. They found everything. The safe in the barn had over $300,000 in bike cars, a second set of ledgers going back 6 years, and a list of properties that makes what you found look like just the beginning. Hannah sank back onto the couch, breath, leaving her in a long, shuddering rush. 6 years, she whispered. 6 years of doing this to people. Forged deeds, fake code violations, payments to at least 2 other deputies besides Castellan. Jack sat down across from her, elbows on his knees. Wendell says Pharaoh's already got enough to charge Victor Hale with racketeering, fraud, extortion, and witness intimidation. And that's before they finish going through everything in that safe. Witness intimidation, Hannah repeated softly. That's me. That's you, Jack confirmed. Which means your testimony isn't just helpful anymore, Hannah. It's central. You're the thread that pulled the entire thing apart. Tears slid down Hannah's face, but they came easier, this time lighter somehow, carrying 11 days of fear out with them instead of adding to the weight of it. Is he in custody? She asked. Victor, is he actually taken into custody at his ranch about 30 minutes ago? Jack said. No resistance. Wendell said he looked like a man who already knew the math didn't work in his favor anymore. And Castellan. Picked up an hour before that, Jack said, along with the deputy who showed up at the post office this morning. Pharaoh's cross-referencing bank records on 2 more names right now. Might be more. Hannah sat with that for a long moment, letting it settle into her bones, letting herself finally believe it was real. 11 days of running, 11 days of sleeping in her car, of flinching at every headlight, of trusting no one, and now, in the space of a single morning, it was simply over. I don't know what to do with this, she admitted quietly. I've spent so long just trying to survive the next hour that I don't actually know what comes after. Nobody expects you to know that yet, Jack said. Give it time. Today all you have to do is exist without looking over your shoulder. That's enough for one day. 3 days later, Hannah sat across a small metal table in a government building 2 hours from Cross County Agent Farrow. On one side, a stenographer typing quietly at the other end, and gave her full statement, every detail, every date, every name laid out clean and complete for the record. It took nearly 4 hours. When it was finished, Farrow closed her folder and looked at Hannah with something that had shifted over 3 days, from professional distance into something closer to genuine respect. You know, Farrow said, in 11 years doing this work, I've had witnesses with law degrees who couldn't put together a case file half as organized as what you carried out of that ranch in your head. You should think about a career in this line of work. Hannah managed a tired, surprised laugh. I was studying accounting because I liked spreadsheets. I never planned on any of this. Funny how that works sometimes, Farrow said, standing and extending her hand. The world needs more people who notice when the numbers don't add up and who don't look away once they do. The weeks that followed unfolded slower than Hannah expected, in ways both painful and quietly healing. Ruth Ann Pemberton, the 81-year-old widow whose stolen 80 acres had first cracked the case wide open, was among the first to have her land returned. Tears streaming down her weathered face as she stood on the property her husband had worked for 40 years property she genuinely believed was lost forever. 6 other families followed over the coming months, each restoration chipping away at 6 years of quiet, calculated cruelty. Victor Hale's trial was still months away, prosecutors building a case so thick with evidence that his own attorneys reportedly began quietly discussing a plea deal before the first pretrial hearing had even concluded. Castellan and 2 other deputies were suspended without pay, facing charges of their own. Their badges, the very things Hannah had once believed made a person safe, stripped away entirely. Hannah didn't go back to finish her degree in accounting that fall. Instead, with a recommendation from Agent Farrow carrying more weight than she ever could have imagined, she took an entry-level position assisting the Financial Crimes Division, tracking exactly the kind of quiet hidden fraud that had once nearly cost her everything. She was good at it, better than good. 6 months in, her supervisor told her she had an instinct for finding what people worked hardest to hide. And Hannah understood finally that the very thing that had made her a target was the same thing that would make her dangerous to men like Victor Hale for the rest of her career. It was late autumn when she finally drove back out to the Cross County Gas and Grocery, the same station where an exhausted 20-year-old had once stumbled through the door on a torn sneaker and asked 3 strangers in leather vests for the nearest police station. The neon sign still buzzed and flickered above the pumps. Some things apparently never changed. She found them at the same corner table like they'd never left Jack Preacher, tiny coffee cups in front of them, patches on their vests catching the afternoon light through the window. Jack looked up as she approached, and something warm broke across his weathered face. "Well," he said, "look who found her way back." "I brought pie," Hannah said, setting a foil-wrapped dish on the table between them. "Homemade, my mom's recipe. It's not much, considering everything, but it's what I had." "Sweetheart," Tiny said, already reaching for a fork like he'd been waiting his whole life for this exact pie. "You didn't have to bring us anything." "I know," Hannah said, sliding into the empty chair, the same chair Jack had pulled out for her with the toe of his boot 4 months earlier. "I wanted to." She pulled a folded index card from her jacket pocket and slid it across the table toward Jack, and he unfolded it slowly, reading the handwritten note inside. "That day I thought I was looking for the police. What I really found were people brave enough to help me reach justice." Jack read it twice, and something in his throat worked before he finally looked back up at her. "No," he said quietly. "You found your own courage that day, Hannah. Walking 15 miles on a torn shoe, past a corrupt deputy straight up to 3 strangers who had every reason to look dangerous and none to look kind. That courage was already yours. We just happened to be sitting in the right corner of the right gas station when you needed somewhere to put it." Hannah felt her eyes well up again, but she didn't wipe them away this time, didn't apologize for them the way she had that first exhausted night. She simply let them fall grateful, whole, finally, entirely unafraid. "Victor's trial starts in January," she said. "I'll be testifying." "We'll be there," Preacher said immediately, no hesitation at all. "Every day of it if the court allows it." "You don't have to do that." "We know," Jack said, echoing her own words back to her with a small, knowing smile. "We want to." Outside, the sun hung low over the flat Montana horizon, Gold light spilling across the gravel lot across the same motorcycles that had once carried a terrified young woman through the dark towards safety she hadn't believed still existed in the world. Hannah looked out at them for a long moment, then back at the three men who had chosen on an ordinary Tuesday evening to see a frightened stranger as someone worth protecting instead of someone easy to ignore. Ruth Ann Pemberton now grew tomatoes on the same 80 acres she'd nearly lost forever. 6 other families slept soundly on land that had once belonged to men who took it because they believed no one would ever stop them. Victor Hale sat in a jail cell awaiting a trial he could not buy his way out of, and Deputy Roy Castellan had traded his badge for a public defender in a future far smaller than the one he'd once believed his corruption had purchased for him. And Hannah Carter, who had once walked 15 miles believing she had nowhere left to turn, now sat surrounded by people who had proven without hesitation exactly the opposite. "Thank you," she said again, quieter this time, the words carrying everything that 4 months and 11 terrible days and one impossible night could never fully express. "For believing me before you had any real reason to." Jack set down his coffee, looked at her with the same steady, certain gaze he'd offered across a gas station table the night everything changed, and shook his head slowly. "We didn't believe you because we had proof, Hannah," he said. "We believed you because you had the courage to walk toward the people everyone else warned you to walk away from, and that kind of courage doesn't lie. Not once, not ever." The bikes started one by one outside as the afternoon faded toward evening, engines rumbling low and steady into the quiet Montana air. And Hannah Carter sat in that same gas station, no longer running, no longer hunted, no longer alone. Proof finally and completely that sometimes the very people the world teaches you to fear are exactly the ones who will stand between you and everything trying to destroy you, and that courage once found never truly disappears again.